It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
Question: what does global collapse actually look like, both societal and ecological? Take an honest, objective look around, through a clear lens, toward the wider horizon, and you'll know what collapse looks like, on every front, and it's accelerating by the day. For nearly 3 decades, I've been desperately trying to sound the alarm. Over a decade and a half of that has been with Geoengineeringwatch.org. I'll cover as many bad news breaking reports as I can in this broadcast, but there are now so many, on so many fronts, that it's impossible to keep up, or even to adequately categorize those reports. So please bear with me. I'll do my best to provide puzzle pieces to paint a picture of what we collectively face on the extremely near-term horizon. And before I finish this broadcast, of what we can actually do to still make a difference at this late hour. A quick footnote before I hit the headlines. My core warning for so many years has been this: as unfolding and accelerating biosphere collapse beats the power brokers to the proverbial intersection, making them more desperate and dangerous than ever before, controlling and culling the herd is at the top of their list of agendas and objectives. I've warned about some of the primary cards the controllers would play: false flags, pathogen release, and orchestrated conflict. And here we are. But in spite of it all, there are always the disaster capitalists, like pirates filling their pockets with plunder from the deck of the sinking ship. From responsiblestatecraft.org, war drives revenue increases for world's top arms dealer. From the report, new data shows weapons companies winning in all conflicts around the world. No surprise, they make profit off both sides of the conflict. The United States remains the world's dominant arms-producing nation. Again, no surprise. For the record, the U.S. is by far the largest participant in the ongoing global geoengineering weather warfare assault. The U.S. military has 3 times more aerial tanker jets than all other militaries in the world combined. Keep that in mind. More from the report. Another major impact of the revenue surge for top arms makers is the diversion of funding and talent from addressing urgent global problems, like unfolding planetary omnicide, for example. They continue. The militarization of the global economy has a double cost: lives lost in conflict zones and devastating problems left unsolved. The situation needs to be treated as far more than a grim parade of statistics about who benefits from a world at war. It should be treated as an urgent call to action for a change in global priorities. Let's stop there. First, does anyone think the clinically insane that currently run the world, aka the money printers, are going to change their priorities or their behavior? Raise your hand. Didn't think so. Next, in regard to those chaos, carnage, and casualties from conflict zones, the power brokers have always viewed this as a positive factor, not a problem, just another covert form of thinning the herd. And though this has been especially true for those living in regions of the Middle East of late, it's also true of every other region where conflict zones are fomented and orchestrated. Keep in mind that the often armed U.S. population is a rapidly increasing liability to the manipulators of the Matrix. Moving on. From the UK Guardian, many in US and Western Europe think Third World War likely within 5 to 10 years. Let's stop there. No need to worry about that headline. Short of a complete course correction by the human race, we won't make it anywhere near that long. Wait and see. How's the weather warfare going? From the Weather Channel Climate Engineering Cover-Up Agency, trying to explain away the weather and temperature whack-a-mole being waged by the climate terrorists. Here's the headline. It's not just you. Drastic temperature flips have become more intense and more frequent. That's the end of the headline. From the report, a team of scientists has found that drastic temperature changes across the planet are becoming more frequent, more intense, and more sudden. Really? It took a team of so-called scientists to figure that out? On the orbiting asylum, the answer is yes. There's more. A recent study showed that these swings, including both warm to cold flips and cold to warm flips, have been increasing in frequency for much of the planet. Overall, the report states, this is a dangerous scenario for both humans and the environment. Unlike lingering cold blasts and heat domes, the sudden change in temperatures gives little time to prepare or adapt. They then state, the abrupt flips between hot and cold conditions can cause stress on the human body and even elevate risks of illness and death. Final excerpt. Agriculture also suffers from the temperature flips as crops may blossom prematurely in a false spring or be damaged by an unexpected mid-spring frost. That has been the case in my region of Northern California for about the last 6 or 7 years. Everything blooms and buds, and then we get the chemical flash cool down, often frozen material falling from the sky, whether it's hail or a mid or late April cotton ball size frozen flakes of, again, there's chemical nucleating elements in this. We've tested it, so we're not guessing. These are patented processes, by the way. No secret that it's going on. I've been over many times in this broadcast. Chinese scientists create artificial snowstorms. Search that exact title. You'll find all mainstream media covered it. But if you bring it up here, suddenly you're marginalized. And how many just want to go along with the herd because they don't want to face any resistance from family or friends? Why are we here? To just float down the river in any direction it may flow? Or to make a difference? That's a decision only each of us can make for ourselves. But let's stop there with this report. The climate engineers are and have long since been waging all-out weather warfare on agricultural production and thus controlling the food supply and controlling populations. And about these weather whiplash flash freezes, what about the fauna? What about the wildlife? This completely imploding. How can it be that no one's alarmed? The forests are silent. They don't smell like forests because the entire ecosystem is dying. The trees are not breathing. They're not respirating. They're not absorbing carbon. They're not releasing oxygen. They're just dormant and dying. And people go about their lives as if nothing's wrong. And that is so perplexing to me. And when I see that, when I see so many engaged in that completely honorless behavior, it doesn't make me want to join them. It makes me all the more determined to never, ever become like them. On that note, a reminder of this 2,000-year-old quote from the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius: the object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane. How true is that today, more than ever before? Am I stating that climate engineering is our only threat? Absolutely not. Industrialized, militarized, so-called society has laid waste to our once thriving planet in the geologic blink of an eye. And I often ponder and find it extremely profound that so many are so deep in denial about this fact. Any and every human activity that negatively impacts the planet's former energy balance and life support systems is a part of the problem. The list of highly destructive human activities is unimaginably long. Yes, using the atmosphere for a war zone, both chemical and biological, is the epitome of human insanity, for which we will all soon pay the price if it's allowed to continue unabated. But all this being said, again, the threats we face are complex with many levels. It's an all-the-above equation. Keep that in mind. The best way to build bridges with other demographics to expose and halt the climate engineering issue is to agree that there can be no legitimate discussion of climate anything from any perspective without first and foremost addressing and dealing with the climate engineering weather warfare issue. We should all agree on that. On that note, next, real-world geoengineering experiments revealed by UK agency from the UK Guardian. More on this ongoing theater of deception. Part of it covered last week, pretending that climate engineering is just getting out the gate, when in fact, it's an over three-quarter century long unfolding catastrophe. From the report, trials will test ways to block sunlight and slow climate crisis that threatens to trigger catastrophic tipping points. Too late, past all the major tipping points now. Solar geoengineering has enormous and troubling implications, the report says, for global society. The UK funding sets a dangerous precedent for other governments to jump on the bandwagon, and it is the height of folly, the report states, to open the door to field experiments in the absence of any national or international governments, end quote. Stop and think about that. When it is so shockingly obvious what's going on in our skies, and we live in a society that pretends it isn't so, because there's some sort of primitive firewall in so many individuals that simply stops them from seeing reality. If that doesn't change soon, we have no chance. None. The hallmark of a healthy mind, as I've stated so many times, is an unyielding willingness to face the truth, no matter how dire. That is a healthy mind. The Guardian continues, experiments risk normalizing highly controversial theories and accelerating technological development, creating a slippery slope toward full-scale deployment. Again, over 75 years too late for that concern, isn't it? The global powers that be have committed us all to a climate engineering Manhattan project from which there is no escape. We will never again know the planet we have once known. We will never know how much better off we would have been, in spite of the other forms of damage to the planet, how much better off we would have been had climate engineering not put the planet in a straitjacket, contaminating everything, killing its life support systems, preventing it, again, from responding to the other forms of damage. And I'm not taking lightly the other forms of damage. Again, we were on a trajectory for self-extermination under many scenarios that we have created with human activity. But this one factor, and I don't mean to imply there's anything benevolent about climate engineering. There was never anything benevolent. It was always malevolent, always about power and control, and about masking the true severity of damage already done to the planet, much of it by climate engineering itself. Think about that. Increasing the level of an activity that has already wreaked havoc on the planet in the attempt, part of the attempt, while continuing to wage weather and biological warfare in our skies, to mask some of the damage already done. This is where the chemical ice nucleation factor comes in, engineering snowstorms in New Orleans and Florida while it's raining and above freezing in the polar regions. How many Americans know that? I've been over that again and again. How many know that? How many, even on alt media, even sources that claim to be fighting climate engineering, jump up and down and yell global cooling, global warming is a hoax every time there's an engineered chemical cool down? That only helps the climate engineers. That's exactly the narrative they want parroted. Why are so many willing to participate in that? The Guardian report then states this: solar radiation management, SRM, has the potential for serious unintended consequences, you think, such as shifting rains vital to food production. A little more, perhaps. Not surprisingly, the Guardian report omitted the most dire consequences of all, like geoengineering destroying the ozone layer, and we are perilously close to functional collapse right now, getting UVC in the surface, perhaps even some X-ray. We don't know for sure yet. We're still metering and monitoring, and completely contaminating the entire planet. Nowhere to hide, every breath we take. But none of these reports ever mention, oh yeah, all the tens of millions of tons of toxic elements to be sprayed in the atmosphere that have been sprayed for decades are all settling down to the surface and being absorbed into everything, including our lungs, our organs, our brains, everything. Let's add this from Greenpeace. Geoengineering, why dimming the sun isn't a bright idea. Funny. Is this a joke? Yes, Greenpeace, the criminal hypocrisy organization that is paid to pretend climate engineering is only a dangerous proposal. Greenpeace continues, despite being framed as a high-tech fix for global warming, geoengineering poses serious risks and dangers, distractions from the real work of cutting carbon emissions. And yes, carbon is a problem. Okay, I'm not agreeing with Greenpeace. They're a criminal organization. So is Al Gore and the other environmental organizations for their willful omission of this elephant in the equation. But those that think changing atmospheric chemistry, raising, in the case of this particular element, raising it by over 50% in the blink of an eye, geologically speaking, is okay, and that triggers many more downstream mechanisms, methane release, nitrous oxide release. Those are trigger mechanisms for other factors, ozone destruction. Anyone who thinks the planet isn't damaged and that the forms of human activity that are ongoing and accelerating right now, from cruise ships that are as big as Disney World and dumping all their garbage in the ocean and spewing out untold tons of toxic greenhouse gases. And they are greenhouse gases. They do trap heat. That's why nighttime low temperatures are rising twice as fast as daytime highs. Climate engineering elements in the attempt to create short-term chemical toxic cooldowns are trapping more heat than they deflect. All these factors are combining to currently, based on all available data, to raise global temperatures, increase the thermal energy buildup on the planet at the thermal energy equivalent of 13 Hiroshima bombs per second. Not my opinion. Please look up the data on that. Most of it has gone into the oceans, but no more because they're superheating. So sorry to go off on a tangent, but I'm trying to say we have to consider all these factors. And we're back to the equation of climate. No legitimate discussion of climate anything without first and foremost addressing this. But so many alt media are so bent on claiming nothing wrong with the planet, all a hoax. The more we burn, the better. That's not true. That's incredibly irrational. And it harms the climate engineering cause. And that's my point. That's exactly the narrative. The powers that be behind these programs want the public to parrot so that they can continue to pump and burn and incinerate until nothing's left. Greenpeace then states, quote, "Let's be clear. We need science to help us navigate the climate emergency, but geoengineering could easily become a smokescreen. They say we're concerned that governments and the carbon fuel industry might seize on it as a justification to delay the transition away from oil, gas, and coal. Instead of slashing emissions, they could point to future unproven technologies as a reason to keep polluting today." That is exactly part of what's going on in this equation. But Greenpeace has no room to point the finger at anybody. Their hypocrisy is as big as any others. All the COP science conferences, the climate conferences held around the world, last two by oil industry lobbyists and CEOs. Think about that. The purpose of those conferences is not to change business as usual. It's to force countries to actively or passively participate in the climate engineering assault from behind closed doors. That's what those conferences are about. Keep that in mind. The Greenpeace report then states, too big, too risky, too soon, and too late. 75 years too late. They say to deliver results, geoengineering experiments would need to happen on a large scale. You think? Anybody look up of late? That means real physical changes, that's an understatement, to our skies. Again, look up, seas and land. The risks, question mark, they say, unilateral consequences that could be irreversible. Already are. Before even considering outdoor trials, we would need strong governance systems, ironclad rules, and full transparency, not just within nations, but across the globe. None of that currently exists. No easy exit. Perhaps the most troubling of all, they say, many geoengineering methods come with a no-off switch scenario. Injecting particles into the atmosphere, for instance, would require constant maintenance. If the process suddenly stopped, global temperatures could spike back rapidly. A dangerous scenario known as, quote, termination shock. Once we start down that path, the report states we may be locked in for generations. Starting and then stopping climate engineering is termed double catastrophe scenario. More on that in a moment. But consider under any scenario, geoengineering won't continue for generations. We won't be here. We have painted ourselves into a very dark corner. And though I'm encouraged that many states are now passing legislation, DeSantis has just said he will sign that legislation in Florida. Had some communication with lawmakers there. Again, this is important for raising awareness. But understand, these bans will not stop what's happening in our skies. And here's the danger that can and has occurred with these types of scenarios before. So many people then think, oh good, I can write this off my list, it's taken care of because there's a ban. The ban is simply symbolic. Important, but symbolic. If you sit back down on the bench and think the fight's over, you're missing the point. It's just begun. This is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the weekly installment of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Report, the end of the world as we know it broadcast, brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of global climate engineering operations, aka weather warfare. Reaching a critical mass of awareness, only way forward in this fight. Keep that in mind. We can and we absolutely must reach a critical mass of awareness, start a conversation on climate engineering that leads people to a credible source of data. Credibility is key. Geoengineeringwatch.org will continue all of our efforts to be the go-to source on covert climate engineering operations. A conversation on climate engineering can easily be started with Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials. They're available on our homepage. Take a look. Keep in mind, we pass these materials on for less than our cost of producing and shipping. Our only goal, stop the insanity in our skies. Please help us to sound the alarm. Let me take a momentary detour with this footnote, a comment submission to geoengineeringwatch.org. Quote, "You people should worry about real dangers like cell phone radiation, not, quote, chemtrails." This is the kind of knee-jerk, clueless response from people that need to look a bit deeper. Yes, cell phone dangers are a problem. Frequency transmissions for climate engineering operations are about 10 times more powerful. Clearly, this person doesn't realize that. Not to mention the toxic tens of millions of tons of nanoparticles floating down on us: aluminum, barium, strontium, manganese, polymer fibers, surfactants, graphene. Not to mention two of those elements, in the case of polymer fibers and graphene, biological carrier agents used to carry pathogens from the clouds to the ground. So, yes, cell phone radiation a problem, climate engineering and all that it entails a much bigger problem. With that in mind, let's get back on track here. Again, I'll try to weave these headlines together. There's so many and from so many different directions. It's difficult at best. And I'm so pressed on time. I'm trying to cover so many bases with so much communication and shipping out materials to state representatives, trying to do as many interviews as I can. I'm trying to keep up, so please bear with me. I've been putting in 7 days a week for as long as I can remember, my family as well, just over 2 decades. But I will keep my stride, no matter what. And thanks to all those that are doing their very best, given their individual circumstances and situation, we march together in this fight. From phys.org, droughts and heat waves reduce plants' ability to absorb CO2. Study finds photosynthesis stops at 104 degrees. For those who don't know, stops at 104 and tapers down radically before then. And as nighttime low temperatures rise as fast as they are, that is radically inhibiting plant growth as well. We also have VPD, vapor pressure deficit, which I spoke about so many times in this broadcast, affects everything from crops to forests. Not enough humidity in the atmosphere in so many regions because the desiccant particles being spewed out, and yes, spewed out, it's not jet exhaust. These are payload dispersions of desiccant particles, aluminum, barium, strontium, manganese, polymer fibers. Think about it. You can't put 40 to 60 million tons annually of abrasive particles through jet engines and have those planes fly much past the perimeter of the airport. And speaking of that, if this was a jet fuel, quote, jet exhaust issue, the airports would be so contaminated, no one would be able to live within 100 miles of an airport. A large jet carrier consumes about 5,000 or up to 5,000 gallons of jet fuel on takeoff alone. Think about that. These are sprayed dispersions. We have up-close photographs of the retrofit nozzles. We have film footage of the nozzles, wing nozzles being turned on and off. KC-10s, KC-135, C-17s, they're turning their transponders off. They're flying on non-commercial routes. These are all patented processes, patented elements. The data is overwhelming. The just jet exhaust is a repackaged, regurgitated official denial. That's what it is. I'm going to keep blazing through headlines. I'll provide as much relevance as I can. You can look them up to dig deeper. Again, so much unfolding, so much coming at me. Very difficult to keep up. From Science Direct, aluminum alters the permeability of the blood-brain barrier. Yes, it does. And we're all sucking up aluminum nanoparticles with every single breath we take. There's synergistic toxicity, which means when you combine this already toxic element with other toxic elements like mercury, in the case of those two elements, which we all have in us now, we know the overall toxicity, the synergistic toxicity, can increase by as much as 10,000%. That's 100 times worse. What about the other elements? Barium, strontium, manganese, graphene. We don't even know, can't know. And they're making every effort to make sure we don't find out. It's a wonder any of us are walking and talking. Geoengineering goes polar. A faster, riskier way to cool the Earth. That's from SciTech Daily. Let's add this, the mission to dim the sun, how controversial geoengineering technique could cool the planet using existing aircraft. Went over part of that last week. It's been the big lie for so long from the climate science disinformation people, David Keith, Douglas McMartin, Ken Caldera, there's many, and claiming, well, it can't be happening because we don't have planes that can carry out an operation because based on their definition, the planes would have to be twice as high as they are. That doesn't mean it's not happening at a lower altitude because it is and it has been, and now we have an admission of that. Oh, by the way, we can use existing aircraft to do this. Yes, they are. It's exactly what they're doing. Lower altitude, which means the particles fall much faster, which means they have to spray exponentially more to keep this toxic cloud going, and that's what they're doing, killing the planet in the process. This headline, whiplash weather set to disrupt U.S. this summer, forecast warns. That's from MSN and other sources. That's the scheduled weather. Be ready for it. Already happening. Goes from 80 degrees to frozen material back to 80 degrees. Went over part of that earlier. That's wreaking havoc on anything left alive. If you think global climate engineering operations are just a dangerous proposal, think again. Let's add this thought, geoengineering. Filling the skies with sun-blocking toxic particles while governments around the world are pushing for solar power. That's what brought me into this fight. For those that don't know, I have a large off-grid home, huge solar power system. I have wind and hydro, and I was losing 60, 70, 80% of my solar PV uptake from whatever these aircraft were emitting, which I knew from my background, part of which was in solar power. I worked on one of the first commercial solar plants in the continental U.S. in the early 80s. That plant's gone now because it was dysfunctional. You can see that plant in Planet of the Humans. Search that documentary and view it to find out just how non-renewable so-called renewable energy is. But anyway, losing massive amounts of my solar uptake, 60, 70%, sometimes higher. That's not 60, 70% of visible light loss, but it's diffuse light. It's not direct sunlight, which makes PV dysfunctional. I began to test my precipitation, had hoped I would not find aluminum in it. I did. I continued to test for 18 months before I went public with some of my findings. What was I to do? Knowing these programs are going on over my head, knowing aluminum is toxic to all life forms, period, no exception, there's nowhere to hide. There is nowhere to hide. Whatever causes or concerns you think are worth fighting for, and many are, but keep in mind, all of them will be moot if we don't stop what's happening in our skies. So back to the so-called renewable energy. How absurd is it that governments around the globe are pushing solar power, putting up massive solar farms everywhere. They're chemically nucleating some of the cloud moisture, which is causing baseball and softball size hail, which is destroying solar farms everywhere, and they're blocking the sun. So many of these giant solar fields are putting out half their design rated power output or less because we're blocking the sun and destroying the ozone layer, which, by the way, creates more penetrating radiant heat, which decreases the output of the solar panels as well. From every conceivable direction, climate engineering is thwarting all primary forms of so-called alternative energy, wind, hydro, and solar. Climate engineering decimating all of them. And yet we hear nobody from those industries saying anything because they all want to protect their paychecks, their pensions, and their personal paradigms. What kind of a life is that? Not one worth living. From CNN. Militarized conspiracy theorist group believes radars are, quote, weather weapons and is trying to destroy them. That's from CNN. Report says National Weather Service offices around the country are on guard after recent threats to agency infrastructure, specifically Doppler weather radars. They are much more than that. The NextRad system is a core component of climate engineering. They say from a violent militia-style group, don't know who that is, emails from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Security Office show. So let's ponder this report. Would it be a reach for the powers that be to eliminate any public access to radar monitoring, blame whoever they want, and yet keep manipulating the weather with the very same frequency transmission facilities that they may claim have been taken offline by somebody? Why would we think they wouldn't do this? And with that in mind, let's add this, also from CNN. Trump administration ends extreme weather database that has tracked cost of disasters since 1980. Nothing to see here. Move along. Hear no evil, see no evil. This report states the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, I have no love for these people, but bottom line is the public should be able to access these databases. That's how we track climate engineering, and they don't want us to be able to do that. They said it's well known that the billion-dollar weather and climate database will be eliminated, a move that will make it next to impossible for the public to track the cost of extreme weather and climate events and climate engineering, which they don't mention here. Question, do actions like this seem like they would come from a power structure that actually wants to stop climate engineering, weather warfare, or rather to do anything in their power to hide such operations from public view? Eliminate the databases. Pretend it's just jet exhaust. All of this is in the same category. Connect the dots. Let's keep going. More false narratives. So-called sustainable aviation fuel, a true oxymoron. From the UK Guardian, sustainable aviation fuel in the US could be anything but. Let's stop there. What a gross understatement that is. And how absolutely moronic is it to turn what's left of our food supply into jet fuel, perhaps for geoengineering jets that are carrying out sprayed payload dispersions of highly toxic climate engineering elements like aluminum, barium, strontium, manganese, polymer fibers, graphene, and who knows what else, with coal fly ash as a likely base material for these operations. Peer-reviewed study to cite that fact. And what's the lie that's pushed on service members that are participating in this insanity? That climate engineering is necessary and needed, which couldn't be further from the truth, and that once it's started, it can never be stopped. That's what they're told. That's another omnicidal lie. As mentioned earlier in this broadcast, the science term of starting climate engineering and stopping is double catastrophe scenario. But what's the truth? Here's the truth. That's like telling an addict, once you start on a substance, you have to keep upping the dose until you die. When in fact, it's exactly that trajectory that will cause their demise, and the same is true with the planet. The weather terrorists are upping the dose by the day, carrying out their weather warfare operations. If they are not stopped in the very near term, there will be nothing of the planet's life support systems left to salvage. If we can expose and stop them by simply reaching a critical mass of awareness, we could cause a shockwave around the world as populations everywhere know what their governments have done to them without their knowledge or consent. Pitchforks and torches moment. If we can expose and stop this, allow the planet to respond on its own to the damage done. That is the only way in which we may buy time. If we can do that, we can examine the other challenges we face. If we don't do that, we're done. Simple. Is the picture getting clearer? The grand facade that tech will fix what tech caused in the first place. Sure thing. The lie of perpetual expansion on a finite planet with finite resources and now failing life support systems. More headlines from the Moscow Times. Late spring snow hits Moscow, toppling trees and causing power outages. That's not all it did much more damage than that. They say the record snowfall came a day after Moscow was hit by record rainfall. They need the moisture to chemically nucleate to create the chemically frozen material. The same thing happening in the U.S. They're all participating in this just like they did in CV-19. And the report says that this freak late snowstorm came after an unusually mild winter. No, a record warm winter. Let's make it clear. While it was blizzarding in New Orleans and Florida, it was above freezing and raining in Moscow and Siberia. How many Americans know that? They're all participating in chemical ice nucleation, trying to confuse and divide their populations as to just how damaged the planet is until the moment of impact. From the UK Guardian, warning over killer fungus, which could infect millions as it spreads across Europe. That's the scheduled scenario. They say a killer fungus is set to spread through new parts of Europe due to rising temperatures, according to a new climate change research report. So consider again, filling the atmosphere with these toxic elements that kill beneficial microbiome everywhere, from the clouds to the ground, then allows non-beneficial to take over, and who knows what they're putting in this mix on top of that, and all of these untold trillions and trillions of particles. You can fit 100,000 nanoparticles across the width of a single human hair. You can't even begin to calculate how much is floating around our atmosphere. Those are all fungal proliferation platforms. Fungal everything is wiping out forests, soils, everything else. Beneficial microbiome is dead. Good luck growing in dead soils. The report says the world is nearing a tipping point regarding the rise of fungal pathogens. There are serious threats from this organism, both in terms of human health and food security. You think? What do you think these biolabs are doing all over the world? Nothing? No, they're doing something. They're working for the manipulators of the matrix. Next headline from BBC, hottest start to May on record. They're talking about UK. As temperature hits almost 30 degrees C in London, most of England and Wales are sweating it out. Perhaps a headline like this is their excuse to give geoengineering a go, because all of these matrix sources work in tandem for anything they want to accomplish. From Bloomberg, UAE has hottest April on record. United Arab Emirates as average daily temperatures top 107 degrees Fahrenheit. That's for April. What's July and August going to be like? They say climate change combined with hot, dry winds blowing off the Saudi desert resulted in unusually high temperatures, according to the UAE's National Center for Meteorology. They're neck deep in climate engineering operations also. How well is that working out? Short-term, highly toxic cool downs at the cost of an even worse planetary meltdown. That's what you get with climate intervention operations, not to mention contaminating everything. From the UK Daily Mail, this moment, gigantic wall of dust and sandstorm engulfs Saudi town, sparking travel chaos and evacuations. They say emergency protocols have been initiated across Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Jordan after a massive dust storm swept in and engulfed an entire town. This is much more serious than most people understand. Residents said it was like something out of an apocalypse film. Hundreds of tourists were evacuated from Petra, famous archaeological site in Jordan's southwestern desert, on Sunday after flash floods overwhelmed the site. At least 2 people were killed in that scenario. Let's look at this insanity from a bit of a distance. How many people know of the Saudi construct ongoing called NEOM, City of Neom, N-E-O-M? Take a look, because it is the epitome of human insanity. Here's a headline on that subject from the financialtimes.com. NEOM climate advisor warns futuristic city could alter weather patterns. A leading climate scientist advising Saudi Arabia's mega project, NEOM, has warned that plans for its new futuristic city could alter weather patterns and the path of wind and sandstorms. Just touched on that subject. And the report continues, in yet another problem for Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salomon's flagship scheme. You have to see this construction site to believe it. It is the epitome of human insanity on a dying planet. It's worse than Dubai, which is also a city in the sand. These constructs that so many think are permanent are anything but. They will be empty shells, relics of the insanity of the human race very soon. If you have not seen the construct on NEOM, take a look, search online, look at the videos of that completely insane endeavor in the middle of the Saudi Arabian desert. Total insanity. Industrialized, militarized, everything was never sustainable. And yet, as the ship goes down and resources are dwindling, we have the city of NEOM and Dubai and the continued expansion of the military-industrial complex. There's something wrong with the human race that so few can see what's coming. None of this was ever sustainable in any way, shape, or form. And yet how many even now can't see that coming? If we have any interest in our own survival, for the survival of anyone, for anyone to make it through what's coming alive, it will take a concerted effort to stop the destruction of the planet's remaining life support systems. And cities like NEOM will never get finished. Never. Not going to happen. But take the time to search and view videos of the construction process in the middle of the Saudi desert. It will shock you to the marrow. Just another day on the planetary asylum. You're listening to the weekly installment of Global Alert News, the Bad News Broadcast, installment number 509, May 10th, 2025. This is Dane Wigington, your host. Global Alert News, brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of climate intervention operations known as geoengineering. Global Alert News is aired on numerous AM and FM stations around the country. Any radio station near you that's willing to air the GAN broadcast in order to inform their listeners of what Matrix Media won't mention, have them contact us at admin@geoengineeringwatch.org. We'll grant them access to our weekly broadcast for free, of course. Recordings of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Hour can be found on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org under the recent column and on the Dane Wigington YouTube channel. If you're on our email list, please put us on your email contact book so that our mailouts don't go to the spam files. Please help us to share the groundbreaking documentary The Dimming, which fully exposes the climate engineering atrocities. Best way to share: circulate the direct link to The Dimming by email. directly from the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Sharing directly helps us to overcome social media censorship. When viewing our YouTube of the Dimming or Global Alert News or any other Geoengineering Watch video on YouTube, please subscribe, share, and comment. All of this helps us to circulate critically important data to a much wider audience. About reaching those that still are not looking up at our filthy, dirty, at best silvery white skies, here's one way. Start a conversation. Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials. They can be found on our homepage. Our only goal, again, provide activists what they need to move this fight forward. If our 20-page fact and photo summary booklet doesn't wake somebody up, don't waste your time. They're not ready to wake up. These are very high-quality printed materials, shocking images, pictures worth 1,000 words, as the proverb goes. We have Geoengineering Watch hoodies and shirts, including new blue Geoengineering Watch shirts. Photos are on our homepage. We have scannable business cards, bumper stickers, all effective tools to help strike up a conversation on the climate engineering onslaught. Reaching a critical mass, again, only way forward in this fight. If we can expose it, we can stop it, but time is running out fast. If you're willing to share a picture of yourself with a Geoengineering Watch t-shirt or hoodie, ideally in a crowded location, please send us your photo so we can post it as part of our activist compilation, which is now part of our materials page. The images encourage others to make their voices heard in this all-important battle to sound the alarm. As always, to those that are steadfastly committed to exposing and halting the climate engineering onslaught, as best you can, given your individual circumstances and situation, you have my deepest gratitude forever. Team effort. How are things going in the USSA? Not so well. On countless fronts, from KLAQ in El Paso, Texas. It's official. 2025 is El Paso's dustiest year on record. The dust has been relentless, blowing through windows and sneaking into cars. This is part of the desertification of the entire planet. And this is a direct result more so of climate engineering than anything else, because the laws of physics make clear it must rain more overall on a rapidly warming planet, and the planet is rapidly warming. We are likely past 3.5 degrees C from baseline, not 1.5. The only way it can rain less overall is climate engineering desiccant particles thwarting evaporation, drying out atmospheric humidity. And yes, I realize there is devastating deluge in other places. When you disrupt the hydrological cycle with climate engineering operations, that's what you get. Drought deluge scenarios, hallmark of climate intervention operations. Let's keep going. Fox News. Researchers see record high amounts of sargassum seaweed expected to wash ashore Florida's east coast. This is much more serious than it sounds. Hydrogen sulfide released from this dying organism in the ocean. Oceans are dying. Let's keep going. More on that subject. From the Weather Channel, ongoing story. Horrific scene on the California coast. Largest algae bloom on record is killing thousands of marine animals. Went over that in previous broadcasts. It's only getting worse, and the summer's just getting started. From phys.org, no fish, no whales, no plankton. An ocean without life will absorb less carbon emissions and accelerate climate change. Let's stop there. No need to continue with this report. The condition the headline outlines isn't relevant for the human race. For this reason, when the oceans die, we will die. There is no other potential. It's called Canfield Ocean. I've cited this scenario for so many years, and now we're nearing the destination. Short of a complete and immediate course correction by the whole of the human race, which certainly doesn't seem likely at this point, to put it mildly. But consider, no matter what anyone else does, family, friends, former friends, each of us is only ever responsible for what we do or don't. Keep that in mind. Life's a seasonal occupation at best. What matters most, all that matters, is what you choose to do in the time you've been given. That's a life that has unshakable solace, knowing, in spite of it all, you've taken the narrow road. On to planetary meltdown. Yes, meltdown. No, the planet isn't cooling. No, we're not entering an ice age. No, the Earth changes that are taking place are not natural in any way, shape, or form. Human activity. Example I've given many times because I hear this so often, people parroting conclusions they clearly have not done any research on whatsoever, that this is planet's going through natural cycles and we haven't done anything. That's like, again, the argument, many might have heard this, but forgive me for repeating it, but claiming the current Earth changes are natural is about as rational as running someone over in a crosswalk, then jumping out, beating them, stabbing them, burning them, shooting them, and claiming to the judge in the court where you would ultimately have to appear that they died of natural causes. It's natural. People die. No, not then, not in that way. We've laid waste to the planet. The denial of this is mind-numbing, and it's just as mind-numbing as those who admit the other forms of human damage but won't admit to climate engineering. There's more than enough denial to go around. Again, we're back to the mantra that can build bridges instead of burn them. We should all agree. There can be no legitimate discussion of climate anything from any perspective without first and foremost acknowledging and including the climate engineering issue. If we can expose and stop that, then we can deal with the rest. Human race, again, comparable to another example I've given before. The kamikaze from the 100th floor, swan diving to the street, I believe the words of Ted Nugent. Human race thinking it's flying as it leapt from the 100th floor. We're passing the second story now. Next stop, the sidewalk. Not going to end well. And that is the trajectory we are on. You can pump the brakes all you want. At that point, not going to change the impact. From extremetemps.com, unbelievable heat wave in Southwest Asia, which will continue and intensify in May, with the April national records shattered. Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Oman, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan. The list keeps going, but you get the idea. Meltdown. We hear nothing about it here, while the biggest military in the world, the most funded military in the world, continues to chemically cool its population to confuse and divide them as to the true state of damage done to the planet, while paradoxically inflicting even more damage in the process. Changing gears. How's the economy doing? How many actually understand the core of that question? No functional environment, no economy. Game over. How many so-called economic experts exist in a bubble of an alternative reality, pretending the economic function of industrialized, militarized so-called society is simply a matter of economic policy, apparently without any clue whatsoever about Earth's collapsing life support systems? Mad Max times over 8 billion is coming. Those that still don't see it soon won't have a choice. From the insurancejournal.com, soaring levels of civil unrest and political violence is a key concern for businesses of all sizes as well as their insurers. Next headline, World Bank warns of bleak growth outlook for developing economies. Next headline, this is from the financialtimes.com. Policymakers fret over rising sovereign debt. From the UK Guardian, U.S. economy shrinks in first quarter of Trump 2.0 amid sweeping tariffs. From Reuters, risk of global economic recession surges on U.S. tariff shockwaves. From MSN, hundreds of homes up for sale as residents flee coastal town. They're talking about, again, the storm destruction, coastal erosion. This is wreaking havoc on coastal everything. It's going to get a lot worse soon. Let's keep going. From newscientist.com, disastrous back-to-back heat waves and droughts surge across Eurasia. From phys.org, global temperatures stuck at near-record highs in April. From mongabay.com, winter warming and rain extreme events pose overlooked threat to Arctic life. Yes, raining in the polar regions now. They say, unsurprisingly, extreme weather events in winter do not bode well for Arctic biota. No question. You can't just alter ecosystems that have evolved in a certain direction for time immemorial and expect anything to do well. From USA Today, dangerously hot in Alaska. New warnings show climate change impact. It's imploding. The cryosphere is imploding. But wait, what about this new shocking headline from most Matrix media sources? Antarctica's astonishing rebound. Ice sheet grows for the first time in decades. A recent study led by Dr. Wang and Professor Shin of Tonghai University, Chinese university, has found a surprising shift between 2021 and 2023. Consider this. Two scientists with no visual proof of anything have changed their interpretation of satellite data that flies in the face of visible observations around the globe, and we have the whole of Matrix media trumpeting this as proof that there's nothing wrong. The ice is growing. No, it's not. No, it's not. Watch Chasing Ice, visual, not two Chinese scientists from a Chinese university. How many people disclose this fact? They just pump this out as if it's gospel from every credible source on the planet. No, it's not. Two scientists from a Chinese university, and they're talking about a region that likely got a little bit more rain when it would have gotten nothing before, no precipitation at all, because it's generally historically too cold. Now there's a little bit of rain, and maybe there was a little more chemical nucleation going on in that region to create some statistic that they're trumpeting this. Here's another one from Fox News. Antarctic gains ice for first time in decades, reversing trend of mass loss. It means virtually nothing. And what is the bottom line? What is the bottom line that reflects a visual confirmation of land ice melting? Sea level rise. Can't hide that. Sea level rise doesn't happen from sea-based ice, which is at record low in both poles. Land-based ice creates ocean rise. Let's add this with that in mind from MSN. NASA issues warning after sudden change in the ocean surprises scientists, getting faster and faster. An abrupt rise in global sea levels last year has raised concerns. The increase was far more than what scientists had been expecting. A higher than usual amount of ocean warming, along with meltwater from land-based ice, caused a jump in sea level that surprised scientists. You can look online, your own eyes. I'm not asking anybody to believe me, but I'm asking you to abandon ideology, preconception, and bias, and understand the planet's in total meltdown. Industrialized, militarized society is a heat engine, period. We're going through 100 million barrels of hydrocarbon fuel a day, 26 million tons of coal a day. We're cutting down the forests. We're paving the oceans. How can that not have an effect? And now add climate engineering. Short-term, toxic chemical cooldowns at the cost of an even worse warming, particles that trap even more heat than they deflect. How can this not have an effect? And how can people possibly jump up and down in denial, claiming that everything's fine now because two Chinese scientists from a Chinese university reinterpreted some data and came up with a conclusion that every single matrix media source pumped out because it helps to confuse and divide the population and keep the fighting going, and that's what they like. Drive a wedge into society, keep them from seeing the oncoming train of total planetary incineration and collapse. And that's what that headline is about. So if you bite at the first shiny object that flashes in front of your face without objective investigation, that's a mistake. And that harms the climate engineering cause. About cover-up, let's add this. From InsideClimateNews.com, Trump administration decommissions sea ice data that sounded an alarm on Arctic climate change. Just covered up by closing down the data sources. Does this sound like an administration that has any interest in stopping climate engineering? Absolutely not. And I'm not focusing on any political stripe here. They're all components of the cancer that currently runs the world. Let's add this from the New York Times. U.S. government to stop tracking the costs of extreme weather. From the Washington Post, NOAA will stop updating databases tracking costliest weather disasters. Sweep it under the rug. That's what they're doing. Keep the population oblivious until the moment of impact. Let's add this. Clear-cut national forest, went over that previous broadcast. Clear-cutting half the national forest. Gut marine sanctuaries for commercial fishing. What's left of the fish in the oceans, which isn't much. Full throttle on devastatingly destructive deep-sea mining. It's full throttle loot, plunder, pillage, and pollute until nothing is left, till the moment of impact. And how many are all too willing to go along with that? Because those in power couldn't do what they do without the active or passive participation of the majority population. How much do we hear? The planet's greening, greener than ever. That is so utterly and totally untrue. Forests are dying everywhere, including the Amazon, including the northern latitude boreal forest. And the only falsification that occurs to come up with a statement as stupid as that is that when you have Saudi Arabia pumping groundwater out and greening up deserts for a very short time that are now all dying, that's what that term is based on. Planet is greening. No. Forests are now carbon sources, not carbon sinks. From the Amazon to the northern latitude boreal forest, all is dying. Oxygen content is plummeting. CO2 is skyrocketing because the absorption system of the planet, the forests and the plankton, are dead and dying. No, the planet isn't greening. It's dying, period. Anybody that does any objective research can't not come to that conclusion. Question: is the human race capable of surviving itself? Because it would seem not. Populations have been fed so many lies on so many issues from birth to death. How many will take their last breath without ever actually seeing the world through a clear lens, choosing instead to blindly believe fairy tales that have been carefully crafted by global predator parasite classes that have ruled from behind the curtain for far longer than most would dare to believe? Mass delusion fantasy that everything will magically get better no matter how high the tidal wave of total collapse looms over our collective heads. We can decide to do nothing, or we can decide that life has meaning far beyond what we can truly comprehend. We can decide that no matter what we face, no matter how great the odds are against us, doing what is right because it is right will always be the right path. To commit oneself to such a compass heading without yielding to fear or trepidation is to know unshakable solace. We can accept reality well, or we can accept it poorly, but accept it we must. What could be more empowering than knowing at your very core that you steadfastly refuse to go silently into the night? Collectively, we can yet make a difference. We can yet make a quantum leap in the right direction. Fully exposing and halting the climate engineering assault and all that it entails must be our top priority. Sharing credible data from a credible source is key. Check the activist suggestions link on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for specific instructions on how you can help to move this fight forward. Please make your voice heard. Make every day count. Decide at your core that you will never yield, ever. We march together in this all-important battle. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington from Geoengineeringwatch.org.